Typically, we are recognising that our job is to support kids to do a really good job of the learning and putting everything together. However, we need to recognise that the foundation skills to learning are in fact recognising information from your senses, knowing what it means and interpreting that correctly. The ability to do that then means you learn how to actually recognise what your body is telling you, which then means you can use your body better. And then it means that you can actually write rapidly on the line, forming letters correctly and spelling and punctuating all at the same time and integrating all this information together. Because one of the things that's fascinating from my point of view about handwriting as an example is that it's so many skills all put together. And that's a really tough thing for lots of our kids to manage. They can do each individual component, but putting it together is the tough part. What I'm talking about here from a sensory point of view is that many of the kids we see don't have good awareness of what their fingers are doing. So what's a great thing to do if you don't know what your finger's doing? Press harder, because it gives you more awareness of what your hand is doing. Or hold the pencil really, really tightly. That's also a good strategy. So these are things that we might actually typically see, and this is true for cutting as well as other fine motor constructive activities. And what you'll find is that some kids spend more time looking at their hand than they are about what they're actually doing, because they're very cleverly compensating for not getting that innate feedback. This is where we talk about sensory processing and the fundamental support that lends to learning. One of the things, the most common thing that brings little people to occupational therapy is their handwriting. The trouble is, so often I'm working with floppy fingers up here because they're a floppy noodle in the middle. And here I am trying to tell mum and dad, I know his handwriting's lousy, I know that's why you're here, but the problem is he's got no stable base to work from. So this is the big picture that we're looking to address. So the way that you can control your trunk here then influences how you're actually able to position your body for effective control, which then means if you've got good control, you can control what happens in your hands. If you don't have good control, life becomes effortful, life becomes awkward, and often the outcome of your skill isn't all that flash. For those of you who learnt to type, this is the kind of thing that you probably recognise because it's got every letter in the alphabet. The reason I'm sharing it with you is because this is the kind of stuff that we tend to use for an assessment of handwriting skills. So you get a chance to see the commonalities in how it is that kids form letters. For example, we're looking at the fact that C and O and A are all formed in the same way in theory, and yet lots of little people manage to do each one differently with lots of swirls and then a stick randomly on the end if you're lucky to make an A. So this is one of the assessment tools we use, but I raise it purely so you recognise what other things might be available. There's a range of silly versions of this as well, but this is the most kid-friendly that there is. And also when you go to a psychologist and they do a handwriting speed test, this is the kind of thing they might use for kids that are years 3 and up. What you find is, if you and I go to a physio and say, oh, I've got a dreadfully sore back, what they're going to say to you is, oh, the back isn't so much the problem as your tummy muscles. So lots of us have this pregnant kind of look that says, my tummy muscles are floppy, I need to tighten them to tuck my tail under. This is true for our kids too. So whilst we're talking more about the handwriting today, this is the stuff we go through next week in gross motor skills. Have a look at the way your kids walk. Are they in an upright position, or are they in fact the pregnant little people with their bottom stuck out? But what I'm suggesting to you is, if this control is difficult even up the mat at kindy, the best thing you can do at a table is to slump your body over it and become like a puddle. Or if you're a bit clever, so you don't do the really obvious stuff that you see lots of kids do, what you'll do is tuck your tummy against the table. So you're giving yourself some support without anyone knowing that you're doing it. Or you might tuck your legs around the bottom of the chair. So again, you're creating stability where you might not have it. So as much as parents think I'm quite odd, half the time I'm looking under the table at what kids are doing instead of looking at on top, because their body plays such a huge role in their handwriting skills. What's important to recognise is that when we're doing these things, there are two things that are important. The how do I do it, which is just as important as the actual product or the outcome. Now, looking at pencil skills particularly, what we often find is that we pay more attention to the kids for whom their writing isn't legible because it makes our life difficult. However, I would also argue to you that the way that they do their writing is equally important, because if they're finding it tricky or awkward now, it only gets worse with time. So that as the demands on them increase, particularly in terms of the quantity or the speed, you find that their writing gets, even if it's okay now, becomes less legible, and the amount of effort that goes into it becomes really problematic. So what we've recognised then is that the strength in your fingers is going to very much influence your control for cutting, writing, opening lunch boxes. What we're looking for, let's talk about your grip for a second. What we're looking for in any of the controlled fine motor skills we're doing is that you've got a nice C-shaped web space in here. So you have a cup for control. If you don't have a cup, then it probably tells you that your fingers are lacking strength. If you think about the way that you and I turn keys in a door, the way that you put your earrings in, the way you tie your shoelaces, you actually really rely on that rounded web space. The things that we see in kids that don't have good fingers is that the web space collapses. So, one of the ways of checking this out with kids is the Pencil Olympics. I'm sure you've all heard of Pencil Olympics. Things like the sprint, where you start at the base of your pencil and you have to sprint your fingers all the way up to the top. Now, have a look at what your fingers do when you do that. You keep that nice rounded web space. If your fingers are flat, it's very much harder to do that. There's also the Baton Twirl. Again, it requires really good finger strength to manage it. Now, these are things that you and I do to turn coins around in your fingers, to thread them into a money box, turning puzzle pieces around to put them into a puzzle. It's stuff that you and I use every day. But this way you get a chance to really check it out, and getting a classroom with people to do it at once, you get a chance to see the huge variance in the finger strength and control that goes with it. The other thing that you'll notice are the kids that, instead of holding with their thumb tip, they'll hold it with their thumb joint instead. So that's giving you a good sign that probably their thumb strength isn't fantastic.